Welcome back, my friend. The lamps are lit, the wind has quieted, and somewhere in the shadows the Niffler has found something shiny again. But this time, it's not gold. It's a story. And tonight, he's ready to share it with you. So settle in and listen closely. It begins like this.
The November wind stripped the last yellow leaves from the trees surrounding Hogwarts, scattering them across the frozen ground like cursed parchments. Bellatrix Black stood by the window in the Slytherin common room, watching as darkness slowly consumed the castle. Her black curls fell in waves over her shoulders, and her dark eyes reflected the cold fire of the hearth. 7th year, her final year at Hogwarts, and she intended to make it unforgettable. "Black, have you chosen a topic for your dissertation yet?" came a voice behind her. Bellatrix turned slowly. Cassius Rosier sat in one of the deep green armchairs, holding a list of NEWT topics in his hands. His fair hair lay perfectly styled, and his gray eyes looked at her with interest. Cassius had always been too proper, too restrained for a true Slytherin. "Still considering my options," she replied, approaching closer. There wasn't a hint of uncertainty in her voice. Bellatrix Black was never uncertain. "I heard Professor Morningstar is offering some interesting topics in defense against the dark arts," said Cassius, not lifting his eyes from the parchment. "Something about the psychological aspects of dark magic." Bellatrix stopped. Psychological aspects. This could be useful. "Tell me more." Her voice became softer, almost velvety. Such a tone always worked with men. Cassius finally looked up. "Research into methods of identifying hidden tendencies towards dark magic. Analysis of psychological patterns that might indicate potential threats. Morningstar says it could be useful for future Aurors." Bellatrix settled into the chair opposite, crossing her legs. The fire in the hearth flared brighter, as if sensing her growing interest. "And what methods does he propose using?" she asked, leaning forward. "Interviews, observation, perhaps some forms of mild legilimency under supervision," Cassius shrugged. "Sounds rather dull, honestly." Dull. Cassius lacked imagination. Bellatrix could already see the possibilities opening before her. Legal access to other students' minds. Permission to research their deepest secrets, all under the cover of academic work. "I think it sounds educational," she murmured, and something dark flashed in her eyes. The next morning Bellatrix made her way to Professor Morningstar's office. The corridors of Hogwarts echoed with the sounds of students hurrying to morning lessons, but Bellatrix walked slowly, savoring the anticipation of what was to come. The Defense Against the Dark Arts office was located on the 3rd floor, in one of the castle's towers. Heavy oak doors were adorned with silver runes that glowed faintly in the corridor's half-light. Bellatrix knocked 3 times. "Enter," came a deep voice. Professor Severus Morningstar was a middle-aged man with penetrating dark brown eyes and gray hair that he wore slicked back. A former Auror, it was said, who had left the service after some mysterious incident at the ministry. His desk was covered with piles of parchments, and the shelves along the walls were laden with books on dark magic and defensive charms. "Miss Black," he looked up from his documents. "Rosier mentioned you might be interested in one of my dissertation proposals." "Yes, Professor." Bellatrix sat in the chair before his desk, folding her hands in her lap. "Psychological methods for identifying tendencies towards dark magic. It sounds intriguing." Morningstar studied her carefully. "This is a serious topic, Miss Black. It requires a deep understanding of both psychology and the dark arts, as well as a certain delicacy in working with research subjects." "I understand the complexity of the task," Bellatrix replied, looking directly into his eyes. "And I'm ready for the challenge." The professor remained silent for several minutes, studying her face. Bellatrix didn't blink, didn't look away. Finally, he nodded. "Very well. But there are conditions." He took out a clean parchment from his drawer. "First, all your research must be conducted under my supervision. Second, no student may be subjected to any influence without their consent and their parents' consent. Third, all methods must be ethical and safe." Bellatrix nodded, though deep down she smiled. Ethical methods. Professor Morningstar was so naive. "Of course, Professor. I fully understand the importance of ethics in research." "Excellent." He began writing on the parchment. "I'll provide you with official permission to conduct interviews with younger students. You'll start with volunteers from the 1st and 2nd years. Methods. Exclusively conversations and observation. No magic without my presence. Bellatrix took the signed document, feeling how the parchment warmed under her touch. Official permission. Access to young, vulnerable minds. The first step had been taken. Thank you, Professor. I won't disappoint your expectations. As she left the office, Morningstar's voice sounded behind her. Miss Black, remember, true power lies not in dominating the weak, but in protecting them. Bellatrix paused for a moment, not turning around. Of course, Professor. Protection is exactly what I strive for. But when the door closed behind her, a cold smile played on her lips. That evening in the Slytherin common room, Bellatrix sat at a table surrounded by books on psychology and magical theory. Around her gathered a small group of seventh-year Slytherins, those who shared her views on blood purity and the superiority of magical families. So you're really going to dig into first year's heads? Asked Rodolphus Lestrange, a tall, dark-haired youth with cold eyes. He sat beside Bellatrix, and his hand occasionally touched her shoulder. It's called scientific research, Rodolphus, she replied, not lifting her eyes from her book. And yes, I'm going to study psychological patterns that might indicate problematic tendencies. Problematic tendencies? Repeated another voice. Edmund Avery, also seventh year, with dark hair and sharp eyes. You mean muggle-born sympathies? Bellatrix finally looked up from her book. Around her had gathered 5 Slytherins, Rodolphus, Edmund, Orion Knott, sixth year, but talented enough to earn their attention, Mulciber and Rosier. All of them looked at her with interest and something resembling respect. I mean any tendencies that might pose a threat to the magical community, she said carefully. Disloyalty, sympathy for muggles, doubts about traditional values. And what do you plan to do with those you identify? Asked Orion, his dark eyes glinting in the firelight. Bellatrix smiled, slowly, predatorily. First, study them. Understand how their minds work. And then, she paused, enjoying the attention. Then we'll see if they can be corrected. Rodolphus smiled enthusiastically. Sounds ambitious. True Slytherins are always ambitious, Bellatrix replied, returning to her book. But when they dispersed, Cassius Rosier, who had remained silent in the corner until then, approached her. Bella, be careful, he said quietly. What you're planning, it might go too far. She looked at him with surprise. Too far? Cassius, I'm simply going to conduct interviews with students. What's wrong with that? You know, it's not just interviews, his voice was serious. I see how you look at younger students, how you talk about correcting them. It doesn't sound like academic research. Bellatrix stood, her eyes flashing with anger. And what does it sound like, Cassius? Enlighten me. He stepped back but didn't lower his eyes. It sounds like hunting. The silence that fell after his words was oppressive. The fire in the hearth crackled, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Bellatrix looked at Cassius for a long time and intently, and there was something in her gaze that made him glance around, seeking support. Hunting, she repeated softly. Interesting word. Tell me, Cassius, why do you care so much about the fate of Muggle-borns and half-bloods? Perhaps you have some personal reasons. Cassius paled. What do you mean? Nothing special. Bellatrix gathered her books. Just curious why a pure-blood Slytherin would so defend those who don't deserve protection. She headed towards the stairs leading to the girls' dormitories, but stopped on the last step and turned around. By the way, Cassius, be careful with your accusations. Hunting is a serious matter, and when hunting, one must be certain not to become prey oneself. With these words, she disappeared into the corridor's darkness, leaving Cassius alone in the common room. He stood looking at the empty stairs, and for the first time in many years felt real fear. Meanwhile, in her dormitory, Bellatrix sat at a small desk by the window, recording her thoughts in a personal diary. Outside, the wind howled around Hogwarts towers, but inside it was warm and cozy. Day 1, she wrote in elegant handwriting. Obtained official permission for research. Morningstar is naive but useful. Cassius shows signs of suspicious loyalty to the impure. Worth watching. She paused, listening to the castle's sounds. Somewhere far away echoed the footsteps of the night watch patrolling the corridors. But here, in her room, Bellatrix was alone with her thoughts and plans. Tomorrow I begin with volunteers, she continued writing. Younger students are trusting, especially those who crave recognition from their elders. I'll use that. The quill stopped above the parchment. Bellatrix thought about Cassius's words. Hunting. Perhaps he was right. Perhaps it really was hunting. But was that necessarily bad? Didn't the strong have the right to hunt the weak? Didn't purebloods have the right to cleanse the magical world of unacceptable elements? She closed the diary and hid it in a special chest, protected by several locks and charms. No one should read her true thoughts. At least not yet. The next morning an announcement appeared on the notice boards in all houses. Attention! Students years 1 to 2. Volunteers invited to participate in scientific research on the psychology of magic. Research conducted under the supervision of Professor Morningstar and 7th-year student Bellatrix Black. Participation involves brief interviews and psychological tests. Completely safe and anonymous. For participation, extra points towards exams and the opportunity to learn more about your own magical abilities. Sign up with Bellatrix Black, Slytherin's 7th year. By the end of the day, Bellatrix had 13 volunteers. 5 Slytherins for Hufflepuffs, 3 Ravenclaws, and 1 Gryffindor. Interesting. She sat in the common room, reviewing the list of names. Each name was accompanied by brief information about family, grades, and personal qualities that she had managed to discover through her fellow students. Timothy Flint, 2nd year, Slytherin. Brother of Larissa Flint from 5th year. Pureblood family, but recently seen in the company of Muggleborns. Emily Clark, 1st year, Hufflepuff. Half-blood Muggle mother. Very trusting, eager to please her elders. Percy Webster, 2nd year, Ravenclaw. Son of an Auror, but shows excessive interest in magical creatures, including those considered dangerous. Each name was a potential opportunity. Each student, a window into a whole world of secrets, fears, and weaknesses. Bellatrix smiled, folding the list. Tomorrow the real work would begin. Tomorrow she would start her first real hunt. And for now, all that remained was to wait and plan, and prepare for what promised to be the most interesting experiment of her life. Outside the storm was gathering strength, and the wind beat against Hogwarts windows with such force as if trying to warn of what was approaching. But inside the castle, Bellatrix Black slept peacefully, and she dreamed of power, control, and absolute dominion over the weak minds of those who dared stand in her way. Monday morning found Bellatrix in an unusually elevated mood. She had awakened before dawn, when the castle was shrouded in silvery mist that crept from the Black Lake. The other girls in the dormitory were still sleeping, their breath creating barely visible clouds in the cool air. But Bellatrix was already sitting at her desk, reviewing her list of volunteers and composing a plan of action. The first interview was scheduled for 9 o'clock. Emily Clark, 1st year, Hufflepuff. Half-blood. The perfect beginning. Bellatrix had chosen a small classroom on the 4th floor for the meetings, one that was usually unused. Professor Morningstar had given her the key with the condition that the door remain open, and that he would periodically look in for supervision. Naive man. He truly believed he could control what happened in his presence, but was completely unaware of how much one could learn about a person even during the most innocent conversation. When Bellatrix entered the classroom, sunlight was already streaming through the tall Gothic windows, casting colored reflections on the stone floor. She arranged 2 chairs opposite each other, one for herself, the other for her subject. On a small table she laid out parchments, quills, and several books on the psychology of magic. Everything had to look professional and academic. Emily Clark was the first to appear. A small girl with chestnut hair gathered in neat plaits and large green eyes that looked at the world with the trust characteristic of first years. She nervously clutched her books, but when Bellatrix smiled at her, warmly, almost maternally, the child visibly relaxed. "Emily, isn't it?" said Bellatrix, rising from her chair. "Thank you for agreeing to help me. Please sit down." "Thank you, Miss Black," Emily replied quietly, settling into the chair. Her feet barely touched the floor. "I'm very happy to help with your research." Bellatrix sat opposite, taking up her quill and parchment. In her eyes appeared an expression of benevolent interest, a mask she had perfected over the years. "Tell me about yourself, Emily. How do you like Hogwarts?" "Oh, I love it very much," the girl immediately brightened. "There's so much amazing here. Magic, the castle, the ghosts. Though it was a bit scary at first." "Scary?" Bellatrix leaned forward with an expression of sympathy. "What exactly frightened you?" Emily hesitated, biting her lip. "Well, I'm a half-blood. My mother's a Muggle. I was afraid the other children would look at me like an outsider." "And do they?" asked Bellatrix softly, making notes. "Sometimes," the girl admitted. "Especially some Slytherins. They say unpleasant things." Bellatrix felt something dark and satisfied stir in her chest. So the child already knew her place. This simplified matters. That must be very painful, she said, and there was genuine sympathy in her voice. Tell me about your family, Emily. How did your parents meet? For the next 20 minutes, Bellatrix patiently listened to Emily's parents' story. A muggle mother who worked in a hospital, a wizard father who hid his magical nature, a romantic tale of love that transcends the boundaries between worlds. Bellatrix took notes, occasionally asking questions that seemed innocent on the surface. Does your mother tell you about the muggle world? Yes. She tells me very interesting things. About hospitals without magic, about cars, about television. And does that interest you? Very much. I think muggles are very clever if they invented so much without magic. Bellatrix recorded this answer with special emphasis. Fascination with muggle inventions. Respect for non-magical achievements. Dangerous tendencies. Emily, tell me, have you ever wished you were an ordinary girl? Without magic. The child blinked in surprise. No, never. Why would I want that? What if you had to choose between the magical and muggle worlds? If you could only live in one of them? Emily thought for a long time, frowning. That's very hard, but I suppose I'd choose the magical world. Here I can help people with my magic. And Mum would understand, even if it meant never seeing her again. The girl's eyes filled with tears. I don't know. That's a horrible choice. Why do I have to choose? Bellatrix set down her quill and looked at Emily with sincere expression. Sorry, dear. These are just hypothetical questions for research. Of course, you'll never have to make such a choice. But deep down she knew it might come to that. And when it did, such a weak, sentimental child would choose wrongly. When Emily left, Bellatrix remained in the classroom, reviewing her notes. The first interview had provided valuable information. The child was a typical representative of her category, divided between two worlds, unable to fully belong to either. She respected muggles, which made her potentially dangerous to the magical community. But at the same time, she was trusting and easily influenced. The second interview was at 11 o'clock. Timothy Flint, second year, Slytherin. Brother of Larissa Flint from fifth year. A pure-blood family, but with suspicious leanings. Timothy was tall for his age, a boy with dark hair and gray eyes of the Flint family. He entered the classroom with the confidence characteristic of Slytherins, but Bellatrix immediately noticed something wrong in his behavior. Timothy, she greeted him. Thank you for coming. How are things in Slytherin? Good, Miss Black, he replied, settling into the chair. Though sometimes it's complicated. Complicated? In what way? The boy hesitated. Well, some of my yearmates, they say things I don't always agree with. Bellatrix raised an eyebrow. For example, about Muggleborns. They say they don't deserve to study at Hogwarts. But I know several Muggleborns from other houses, and they're very smart and kind. Bellatrix felt coldness spreading through her veins. So even among pure-blood Slytherins, traitors to tradition were appearing. That's an interesting perspective, she said neutrally. What does your sister Larissa think? Larissa? Timothy seemed surprised. She's older. She has her own affairs. But surely you discuss such things? Family values, traditions? The boy hesitated again, and Bellatrix understood she had hit the mark. Larissa sometimes says that times are changing, Timothy finally said. That we need to adapt, not cling to old prejudices. Prejudices. He called blood purity traditions prejudices. Bellatrix barely restrained her anger, continuing to make notes. Do you agree with your sister? I think she's right. If someone's talented and good, why should it matter who their parents are? Bellatrix set down her quill and looked at the boy intently. Timothy, has anyone told you the history of our world? About what happened when we trusted muggles? No. Yes, a little. But that was long ago. Not as long ago as you think, Bellatrix interrupted. And those who forget the lessons of history are doomed to repeat them. She leaned forward, and in her eyes appeared a gleam that made the boy wary. Tell me, Timothy, do you trust your family? Your ancestors, who for centuries preserved magical traditions? Of course I trust them. Then why do you question their wisdom? Why do you think you know better than generations of pure-blood wizards? Timothy paled. I didn't think about it that way. Perhaps you should start thinking, Bellatrix said coldly. Your sister may have forgotten what it means to be a true Slytherin, but you're still young. You have a chance to choose the right path. When Timothy left, troubled and confused, Bellatrix added a few more lines to her notes. The Flint family really was a problem, and if the younger brother was already infected with dangerous ideas, what could be said about Larissa? The third interview was at 2 o'clock. Percy Webster, second year, Ravenclaw. Son of an Auror, but with suspicious interests. Percy turned out to be a stocky boy with curly reddish hair and clever brown eyes. He sat in the chair with the curiosity characteristic of Ravenclaws, and immediately began examining the books on the table. "Is this about legilimency?" he asked, pointing to one of the books. "Among other things," Bellatrix replied. "Are you interested in mind reading?" "Very much. I've read that it's one of the most complex arts. Dad says Aurors sometimes use it for interrogations. Your father tells you much about Auror work?" "A bit. He says I'm too young for some stories. But I know they fight dark wizards and dangerous creatures." Bellatrix leaned forward with interest. "What do you think about dark wizards, Percy?" The boy pondered. "I think they just chose the wrong path. Perhaps they could be convinced if someone tried to understand why they became that way." "Understand?" Bellatrix couldn't hide her surprise. "Rather than punish?" "Well, punishment is important too. But Dad says true wisdom lies in preventing crime, not just punishing it." "Interesting." The child demonstrated a dangerous tendency towards sympathy, even for enemies of the magical world. But at the same time, he was interested in legilimency and other powerful forms of magic. "Percy, are you interested in magical creatures?" The boy's eyes lit up. "Oh yes, especially rare and unusual ones. I've read about dragons, about thestrals, even about dementors." "Dementors?" Bellatrix raised her eyebrows. "That's rather a dark topic for a 12-year-old boy." "I know they're terrible, but I think, if we understood how they work, maybe we could find a way to help them, or at least better protect people." "Help dementors?" Bellatrix nearly laughed. The child was either brilliant or insane. Perhaps both. "Tell me more about your research," she requested. For the next half hour, Percy enthusiastically described his theories about magical creatures. He outlined methods of communication with various species, techniques for establishing trust, even ideas for creating rehabilitation centers for creatures that had committed crimes. His ideas were simultaneously brilliant and completely unacceptable. When the boy left, Bellatrix sat for a long time, pondering what she had heard. Percy Webster was talented and clever, but his sympathy extended even to those who didn't deserve it. Such people could become dangerous if their ideas spread among others. The fourth interview that day was with Philip McNair, a first-year Slytherin. Son of a pureblood family, but the child proved disappointingly normal. He answered all questions about traditions and values correctly, demonstrated proper respect for blood purity, and showed no suspicious tendencies. Bellatrix almost felt disappointed. Such predictability was boring. By the end of the day, she had conducted 3 more interviews, each adding new elements to her understanding of Hogwarts' student body. Some children were properly oriented, others were questionable, still others were openly dangerous in their views. That evening, Bellatrix sat in the Slytherin common room, reviewing her notes. Around her gathered the usual company, Rodolphus, Avery, Orion, and the others. They eagerly discussed the day's events, but Bellatrix was absorbed in her records. "How did the first day of hunting go?" asked Rodolphus, sitting beside her. Bellatrix looked up from her parchments. "Enlightening. Very enlightening. And what did you discover?" Orion inquired. "That the problem is deeper than I thought," she replied slowly. "It's not just individual Muggleborns who don't understand their place. It's an infection of ideas spreading even among purebloods." "What do you mean?" asked Avery. Bellatrix placed the parchments on the table and looked at her companions. "Today I spoke with a boy from Slytherin, pureblood from an ancient family, and he defended Muggleborns, said that times are changing and that old prejudices should be left in the past." The silence that fell was eloquent. Orion frowned, Rodolphus clenched his fists, and Avery shook his head in disgust. "Who?" asked Rodolphus quietly. "Timothy Flint, second year, brother of Larissa from 5th year." "The Flints," Avery muttered. "I've heard various things about that family lately." "What things?" Bellatrix leaned forward. "They're associating with the wrong people, attending events where half-bloods and even Muggleborns are present. Timothy's father recently supported a law in the Wisengamot about equal rights for all wizards." Bellatrix felt anger boiling in her veins. "And what are we going to do about it?" "What can we do?" asked Orion. "They're not breaking any rules yet." "Yet," Bellatrix repeated. "But if we allow these ideas to spread further." She didn't finish the sentence, but everyone understood her meaning. The traditional order of the magical world was under threat, and this threat needed to be stopped. "Perhaps we should inform someone senior," suggested Mulciber. "Someone senior?" Bellatrix laughed, but there was no warmth in her laughter. "Who exactly?" "Dumbledore, who himself sympathizes with Muggleborns. Morningstar, who thinks everyone can be corrected with kind words." She stood and began pacing the room, her robes billowing behind her. "No. If we want something done right, we'll have to do it ourselves." "What do you propose?" asked Rodolphius. Bellatrix stopped and looked at him. In her eyes burned a fire that made even experienced Slytherins feel uncomfortable. "Continue the research. Learn more. Identify everyone infected with these dangerous ideas. And then," she paused, smiling coldly, "and then find a way to enlighten them." That late evening, when everyone had gone to sleep, Bellatrix again sat at her desk, writing in her diary. "Day 2, she wrote. "The situation is worse than expected. The infection is spreading even to pureblood families. The Flints are a priority target. Timothy Flint shows all signs of ideological deviation, requires correction or isolation." She paused, considering her next steps. "Percy Webster, Ravenclaw. Potentially dangerous due to excessive sympathy for enemies. Emily Clark, Hufflepuff. Typical half-blood with conflicted loyalties. Both require further observation." The quill stopped above the parchment. Bellatrix thought about what she had heard today. So many children with wrong ideas. So many potential traitors to the magical world. And all this was happening right under the noses of Hogwarts professors. "Tomorrow I begin the second stage," she finally wrote. "Time to move from simple observation to active measures. Children are trusting. They're easily influenced if one knows the right words and methods." She closed the diary and hid it in her protected chest. Tomorrow would be a new day, new opportunities, and she intended to use every one of them. Outside, the wind howled around Hogwarts towers, but Bellatrix didn't even notice the cold. Inside her burned the fire of purpose, and this fire warmed her better than any hearth. The hunt was only beginning. The week at Hogwarts passed slowly, as if the castle itself sensed the growing tension. November gave way to December, and the first snowflakes began dancing outside the windows, creating ghostly beauty that contrasted with the darkness accumulating in Bellatrix Black's heart. Over the course of this week, she had conducted 12 interviews, and each one added new details to her growing dossier on Hogwarts students. She had developed a classification system: pure, those who demonstrated correct views; questionable, those who needed correction; and infected, those who posed a direct threat to magical traditions. The list of the infected was growing faster than she would have liked. That morning, sitting in the Slytherin common room before breakfast, Bellatrix was reviewing her notes when Cassius Rosier approached her. His usually confident face expressed concern. "Bella, we need to talk," he said quietly, sitting beside her. She looked up from her parchments, and in her gaze was something cold and dangerous. "About what, Cassius?" "About what you're doing. These interviews. I've heard various things." "What things?" Her voice became quieter, which was a bad sign for those who knew Bellatrix Black. Cassius glanced around, making sure no one could hear them. "Emily Clark cried all night after talking with you. Timothy Flint is afraid to leave his room. And Percy Webster has started stuttering. And," Bellatrix leaned forward, "perhaps they've finally understood the seriousness of the situation." "Bella, these are children." Cassius couldn't hide his indignation. "What are you telling them?" Bellatrix slowly closed her notes and looked at Cassius with an expression that made him swallow hard. "I tell them the truth, Cassius. The truth about what it means to be part of the magical world. About the responsibility that lies on our shoulders. About the dangers that threaten our traditions. By terrorizing 12-year-old children? By educating them," she stood, her robes billowing around her. "But I'm more interested in why you care so much about the fate of half-bloods and traitors to tradition." Cassius also stood, and now they faced each other. The common room became noticeably quieter. Other Slytherins sensed the tension. "I care because what you're doing is wrong. And dangerous." "Dangerous?" Bellatrix laughed, but there was no mirth in her laughter. "You know what's truly dangerous, Cassius? Allowing our world's enemies to hide among us. Allowing them to poison our children's minds with their ideas about equality and tolerance. They're not enemies. They're just children who dash." "Who what?" Bellatrix interrupted. "Who believe Muggles are equal to wizards. Who think our traditions are prejudices. Who are ready to betray everything our ancestors fought for." Around them gathered a crowd of Slytherins. Rodolphius stood behind Bellatrix, his hand resting on his wand. Avery and Orion watched from the sides, ready to intervene. But Cassius stood alone. "I'm just saying we need to be careful," he said, trying to maintain calm. "Professors are starting to ask questions. Children are complaining to their parents. And what do you propose? Stop?" Bellatrix took a step forward. "Allow the infection to spread further? I propose acting sensibly, not dash." "Not what?" Her voice became dangerously quiet. "Finish your thought, Cassius." Cassius looked into her eyes and saw something there that made his heart freeze. This wasn't anger. This was something much worse. This was the cold, calculated fury of a predator who had discovered prey. "Nothing," he muttered. "Just be careful." He turned away and left, but Bellatrix called after him. "Cassius." He stopped without turning around. "I'll have a special task soon. Perhaps you'd like to help me. Prove your loyalty to our cause." "Perhaps," he replied without turning back and quickly walked away. When he disappeared into the corridor, Bellatrix turned to her companions. On her face was a smile, but her eyes remained cold. "It seems we have another problem," she said quietly. "Cassius has always been soft," commented Rodolphus. "Perhaps it's time to correct that." "Perhaps," agreed Bellatrix. "But first I need to find out how deep his mistaken thinking goes." That day Bellatrix changed her tactics. Instead of simple interviews, she began conducting group sessions, gathering several students together, supposedly to discuss research results. In reality, this allowed her to observe interactions between children and identify hidden alliances. The first group consisted of 5 students: Emily Clark, Timothy Flint, Percy Webster, and 2 others, Michael Macmillan from Hufflepuff and Susan Costello from Ravenclaw. All of them had demonstrated problematic tendencies in their individual interviews. "Thank you all for coming." Bellatrix began when the children had settled in a circle of chairs. "Today I'd like to discuss some interesting topics that emerged from my research." The children listened attentively, though Bellatrix noticed that Timothy and Emily looked nervous. Percy, on the contrary, seemed interested. "Tell me," she continued, "do you think there are any natural differences between different types of wizards? Purebloods, half-bloods, muggle-borns?" Susan raised her hand. "I think magic works the same way for everyone, regardless of origin." "Interesting thought," Bellatrix made a note. "What do the others say?" "I agree with Susan," said Percy. "I know muggle-borns who are much more talented than some purebloods." Timothy nodded. "Yes, in our year there's a muggle-born girl who's the best at potions." Bellatrix felt the familiar surge of cold anger, but maintained her composure. "What do you think, Emily?" she asked. The little girl nervously twisted her fingers. I don't know. Maybe there are some differences, but that doesn't mean some are better than others." "Ah," Bellatrix leaned forward. "So you admit that differences exist? Well, maybe some small ones." "Emily," Bellatrix's voice became softer, almost hypnotic. "Tell us about your mother, about how she reacted when she learned about your magic." The girl paled. She was surprised. A bit frightened. "Frightened," Bellatrix repeated. "Your own mother was afraid of you, wasn't she?" "Not of me. She was afraid of magic, but not of me." "What's the difference?" Bellatrix stood and began walking around the circle of chairs. "Magic is part of you, Emily. If she fears magic, then she fears who you truly are." "That's not true." Emily began to cry. "Mum loves me." "Of course she loves you," Bellatrix said with feigned sympathy. "But can she truly understand you? Can she share your world? Won't you always remain alone between 2 worlds, not fully belonging to either?" The other children watched this scene with horror. Percy tried to intervene. "Miss Black, perhaps we should dash." "Perhaps we should what?" Bellatrix turned sharply to him. "Ignore reality? Allow this child to live in illusions." "You're making her suffer," Timothy said quietly. Bellatrix stopped and looked at him with an expression of dangerous curiosity. "And you, Timothy Flint, surely know all about suffering. Tell us about your sister Larissa, about how she taught you not to respect your own family." The boy paled. "Larissa didn't teach me not to respect family." "No? Then why do you call your ancestors' traditions prejudices? Why do you defend those who threaten our world?" "I don't dash." "Where is your sister now, Timothy?" Bellatrix interrupted. "Why isn't she at lessons? Where does she spend her time?" The boy looked around helplessly. I don't know. Don't know." Bellatrix smiled coldly. "Or don't want to say. Perhaps she's meeting someone unsuitable? Perhaps passing information to someone she shouldn't." "What are you talking about?" Timothy stood from his chair. "Larissa isn't doing anything wrong." Then why are you so nervous? Bellatrix took a step towards him. Why are your hands shaking? What are you hiding? The other children sat as if spellbound, watching this scene. Emily was still crying. Percy was trying to comfort her, whilst Michael and Susan looked at Bellatrix with growing horror. Nothing, Timothy exclaimed. I'm not hiding anything. You're lying, Bellatrix said calmly. And suddenly her wand appeared in her hand, as if by itself. Would you like me to help you remember the truth? You can't use magic on students, stammered Percy. Can I? Bellatrix turned to him. And who's going to stop me? You. At that moment the classroom door opened, and Professor Morningstar entered. His face expressed concern. Miss Black, what's happening here? I heard shouting. Bellatrix instantly hid her wand and smiled. Nothing special, Professor. Just a lively discussion about the psychological aspects of magic. The children are very interested. Morningstar looked at the tearful and frightened children. Miss Clark, are you all right? Emily nodded without lifting her eyes. Are you all right? The professor asked. The children nodded, but their silence was eloquent. Perhaps that's enough for today, Morningstar said carefully. Children, you may go. Miss Black, I need to speak with you. When the children left, the professor closed the door and turned to Bellatrix. What's happening, Miss Black? And don't tell me nothing. These children looked terrified. Bellatrix sat in a chair and folded her hands in her lap. Professor, sometimes truth can be painful, especially for those accustomed to living in illusions. What truth are you talking about? About the fact that our world is under threat. About the fact that these children are infected with dangerous ideas. About the fact that someone is deliberately undermining our traditions. Morningstar sat opposite her. Miss Black, your task is to study psychological patterns, not to re-educate children according to your personal beliefs. My beliefs? Bellatrix raised her eyebrows. Professor, I'm simply stating facts. These children demonstrate signs of ideological deviation. They need correction. Correction? Morningstar's voice became sharper. Miss Black, these children aren't machines that can be fixed. They're living beings with their own thoughts and feelings. Bellatrix looked at him with pity. Professor, you're too soft-hearted. It's precisely such soft-heartedness that allows our world's enemies to flourish. Enemies? Morningstar stood. Miss Black, what enemies are you talking about? These are children. First and second years. Children grow up, Professor. And if they grow up with wrong ideas, they'll become a threat to all of us. Morningstar looked at her for a long time, and something like understanding appeared in his eyes. Miss Black, I'm forced to terminate your research. Bellatrix slowly stood, and something dangerous flashed in her eyes. Professor, you can't do that. I have official permission, which I can revoke at any moment, and I'm doing so, right now. This is a mistake, Bellatrix said quietly. A big mistake, perhaps. But it's my mistake, and I'm prepared to make it. Bellatrix gathered her things and headed for the door. On the threshold, she stopped and turned around. Professor, you think you're protecting these children, but actually you're condemning them. When the real threat comes, and it will come, they'll be defenseless, and that will be on your conscience. She left, leaving Morningstar alone in the classroom. The professor sat in a chair and rubbed his temples. For the first time in many years, he felt real fear. That evening, Bellatrix sat in her dormitory, reviewing her notes. The official research had been terminated, but that didn't mean her work was finished. On the contrary, now she was free from restrictions and supervision. The real hunt was only beginning. She opened her diary and began to write. Morningstar terminated the official research. Expected, he proved as weak as the rest. But this is even better. Now I can act without restrictions. Priority targets. Larissa Flint, 5th year, Slytherin. Source of infection in the Flint family. Cassius Rosier, 7th year, Slytherin. Potential traitor among our own. Group of problematic students. Require individual counseling. Time to move to more decisive action. She closed the diary and looked out of the window. Snow was falling more heavily, covering Hogwarts grounds with a white blanket. But Bellatrix knew that beneath this innocent whiteness lurked darkness that would soon break free, and she intended to be its guide. December's cold penetrated every crack of Hogwarts, but the most bitter frost reigned in Bellatrix Black's heart. A week had passed since Professor Morningstar terminated her official research, but this had only freed her from unnecessary constraints. Now she could work properly. The first step was simple: establish surveillance. Bellatrix used her influence among younger Slytherins, creating a network of informants. Each of them received small tasks. Notice who Larissa Flint spoke with, where Cassius Rosier went, which books the problematic students from other houses read. The children eagerly carried out these tasks, considering it a game or a way to earn the favor of an older student. They didn't understand they were becoming part of something much darker. That evening, Bellatrix was sitting in the Slytherin common room when Marcus Fletchley, a second year with ambitions and a sharp mind, ran up to her. "Miss Black," he whispered, glancing around, "I've learned something interesting about Larissa Flint." Bellatrix set aside her book and looked at the boy attentively. "Tell me." "She's meeting with someone. Every evening after dinner she goes to the library, but doesn't read books. She sits at one of the tables in the far corner and waits for someone. And who comes to her? Different people. Yesterday it was a girl from Ravenclaw, 3rd year. The day before, a boy from Hufflepuff, 4th year. And today," he paused for effect, "today Cassius Rosier came." Bellatrix felt something cold and sharp penetrate her chest. Cassius and Larissa. Of course. Everything was falling into place. How long did they talk? Nearly an hour. They spoke very quietly, but I managed to get closer. "And what did you hear?" Marcus lowered his voice to a whisper. "Something about children's safety and dangerous methods. Larissa said they needed to warn the others." And Cassius agreed. Warn the others. So they were planning to sabotage her work. They were going to protect precisely those who posed a threat to the magical world. "Well done, Marcus," said Bellatrix, giving the boy several sickles. "Keep watching, and let me know about their every meeting." When Marcus left, Bellatrix remained alone with her thoughts. Cassius and Larissa were working together. This explained many things: why Cassius so resolutely opposed her methods, why Larissa influenced her younger brother. They were part of something bigger. But how big? The next few days Bellatrix carefully planned her next move. She needed information, and the only way to get it was directly from the source. But this meant risk. If she acted carelessly, she could be exposed. The opportunity came on Friday evening. Marcus reported that Larissa had gone to the library again, but this time alone. This was a chance. Bellatrix waited 20 minutes, then quietly left the common room. Hogwarts corridors were almost empty. Most students were preparing for sleep or already asleep. Perfect time for a private conversation. She found Larissa in the most remote corner of the library, at a table laden with books on defense and magical history. The girl was about the same age as Bellatrix, but less attractive, medium height, with chestnut hair and gray eyes that expressed wariness. "Larissa Flint," said Bellatrix, approaching the table. Larissa sharply raised her head, and fear appeared in her eyes, which she tried to hide. "Bellatrix, what do you want?" "Just to talk." Bellatrix sat opposite her. "About your brother. About some troubling tendencies I've noticed. Timothy hasn't done anything wrong." "Not yet," Bellatrix agreed. "But his views problematic. Who taught him not to respect family traditions?" Larissa straightened in her chair. "No one taught him anything. He's just a clever child who can think for himself." "Think for himself?" Bellatrix smiled coldly. "Or think as he's been taught to think." "What do you mean?" Bellatrix leaned forward, and a dangerous gleam appeared in her eyes. "I mean your little meetings here in the library. Your conversations with Cassius Rosier and others. I mean the organization you've created to protect children from dangerous methods." Larissa paled, but tried to remain calm. "I don't know what you're talking about." "You're lying," Bellatrix said simply. "And quite badly. Would you like me to tell you what I know?" She didn't wait for an answer. "You've gathered around yourself a group of students who share your progressive views. You exchange information about my research, warn each other about dangers. You even planned an official complaint to the professors. So what?" Larissa finally found courage. "What you're doing is wrong. You're torturing children." "Torturing?" Bellatrix laughed. "Larissa, you're so dramatic. I'm simply helping them understand reality." "What reality? That Muggle-borns are enemies? That half-bloods don't deserve respect? That only pure-blood wizards have a right to exist? Finally, you're starting to tell the truth." Bellatrix stood and began walking around the table. "Yes, that's exactly what I tell them. Because it's the truth, Larissa. The truth you refuse to acknowledge. It's not truth. It's fanaticism." "Fanaticism?" Bellatrix stopped directly behind Larissa's chair. "Tell me, Larissa, how many wizards have died at Muggle hands over the past centuries? How many of our brothers and sisters were burned at stakes, hanged, tortured? That was long ago, Was it? Isn't the same thing happening now, only more quietly? Aren't Muggle-borns diluting our culture with their ideas? Aren't half-bloods betraying the magical world for the Muggle one? Larissa turned in her chair to look at Bellatrix. You're insane. No, Bellatrix smiled, and this expression made Larissa shudder. I'm simply a realist, and you're an idealist living in a world of illusions. Suddenly Bellatrix grabbed Larissa by the shoulder, her fingers digging into the fabric of her robes. But you know what, Larissa? I'm curious how deep your betrayal goes. Who else belongs to your little group? What secrets are you passing? Whom do you truly serve? Let go of me. Larissa tried to break free, but Bellatrix's grip was iron. No, I won't let go. Not until you tell me everything I want to know. Bellatrix drew her wand and pressed it to Larissa's throat. Now we'll talk properly. Legilimens. The spell hit Larissa like lightning. Her eyes widened and her body tensed. Bellatrix penetrated her mind without any resistance. The girl didn't know how to defend against legilimency, and what she found there exceeded her wildest expectations. Larissa indeed led a group of students, but this wasn't simply a group of idealists. This was an organized network spanning all 4 houses. They called themselves the Protection Alliance, and their goal was not only to oppose Bellatrix's methods, but to generally resist blood purity ideology. The group had 23 students from various years. Among them were 3 prefects, 2 Quidditch team captains, and even 1 head boy. They had connections with some professors, not direct ones, but sufficient for passing information. The biggest shock for Bellatrix was discovering that Cassius wasn't simply sympathetic to the group. He was one of its founders. Together with Larissa, he developed strategies to oppose extremist tendencies among Slytherins. But the most terrible discovery was that the group was planning something more than simple opposition. They were gathering evidence about Bellatrix's activities and those of her companions, preparing a dossier to pass not only to Hogwarts professors, but to official magical world authorities. Bellatrix withdrew from Larissa's mind, feeling a mixture of shock and fury. The girl sat in the chair, her eyes clouded, blood trickling from her nose. Interesting, Bellatrix murmured. Very interesting. She sat opposite Larissa, who was slowly coming to her senses. Protection Alliance, Bellatrix said thoughtfully. What a noble name, and what folly. Larissa tried to stand, but Bellatrix again pointed her wand at her. Sit. We're not finished yet. What did you do? Larissa stammered. Learn the truth. The whole truth. Bellatrix smiled. 23 traitors. In all houses. And all thinking they can stop me. They will stop you. When they learn you're using unforgivable curses dash. Unforgivable curses? Bellatrix laughed. Larissa, legilimency isn't an unforgivable curse. It's simply magic. Painful, but entirely legal. She leaned closer. But you know what's interesting? You've given me all the information I need. Names, plans, connections. Now I know about every one of your traitors. Larissa paled even more. What are you going to do? What's necessary? Bellatrix replied. Cleanse Hogwarts of infection. Show everyone what happens to those who betray their own kind. She stood and looked down at Larissa condescendingly. But first I need to eliminate the main source of the problem. You. You can't just kill me. I'll be missed. Kill. Bellatrix raised her eyebrows in surprise. Larissa, you overestimate your importance. I'm not going to kill you. She raised her wand. I'm going to do something much worse. I'm going to make you an example. Imperio, whispered Bellatrix, and the curse enveloped Larissa in a soft but irresistible influence. The girl immediately relaxed, her face becoming carefree. Under the curse's influence, she was ready to carry out any command. Listen to me carefully, Bellatrix said softly. Tomorrow you'll gather all members of your Protection Alliance. Tell them you have important information about my plans. Bring them to the old classroom on the 7th floor at 9 in the evening. Larissa nodded, her eyes empty and obedient. Tell them this will be the final meeting, after which you'll be able to stop me once and for all. Make sure they all come, especially Cassius Rosier. Yes, Larissa replied monotonously. Good. Now go to sleep. And remember, you remember nothing about our conversation tonight. You simply know you must gather everyone tomorrow evening. Larissa stood and left, moving like a sleepwalker. Bellatrix watched her go with satisfaction. Everything was going according to plan. Better than according to plan. When Larissa disappeared, Bellatrix remained alone in the library. Around her reigned silence, broken only by the distant howling of wind outside the windows. She sat among ancient books and parchments, planning what was to become her greatest triumph. 23 traitors, all in one place. all under her control. This would be a lesson that all Hogwarts would remember. The next day, Bellatrix watched as Larissa carried out her orders. The girl moved through the castle like a programmed automaton, meeting with members of her group and passing them the urgent message. Cassius also received his invitation during breakfast. Bellatrix saw how he read the note, how his face tensed. He looked up and gazed at her across the great hall, and she smiled at him, coldly and meaningfully. Cassius understood. Perhaps not all the details, but enough to realize that not only he had fallen into the trap, but it was already too late. When a person falls into a spider's web, escape is almost impossible. All day Bellatrix prepared. She studied spells, checked plans, prepared everything necessary for her demonstration. Rodolphius and her other companions understood something was happening, but didn't dare ask for details. At 8:30 in the evening, Bellatrix came to the old classroom on the 7th floor. This was the perfect place, remote, rarely visited, with thick walls that muffled sounds. She arranged chairs in a circle, placed candles on tables, and prepared everything for the solemn finale of her hunt. At 9 o'clock the first guests began arriving, and Bellatrix Black finally got her prey. The classroom on Hogwarts' 7th floor had never been intended for what was to happen that night. Ancient walls that had for centuries kept secrets of learning and discovery were now to witness the birth of true evil. Bellatrix stood by the window, watching snow swirl in the darkness. Each snowflake reminded her of a soul, beautiful from afar, but cold and transient. Tonight she was going to show 23 traitors the true nature of cold. Cassius Rosier came first. He entered cautiously, his gray eyes immediately finding Bellatrix by the window. In his hand was his wand, not drawn, but ready for use. "Bella," he said quietly. She turned to him with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Cassius, how lovely that you came. Though you didn't really have a choice, did you? What did you do to Larissa?" "Nothing special. Simply helped her find the right motivation." Cassius took a step forward, but Bellatrix raised her hand. "Don't move. The others will be here soon. Wouldn't want to spoil the surprise." Over the next 10 minutes, the classroom gradually filled. Students came from all houses and years, from 3rd years to 7th years. Bellatrix watched each one carefully, memorizing the faces of those who had dared oppose her. Larissa came among the last. She moved mechanically, her eyes empty and absent. Some of the students became alarmed seeing their leader in such a state. "Larissa, what's wrong with you?" asked a 7th-year Ravenclaw named Elizabeth Lovegood. Larissa didn't answer, simply sat in her assigned seat and stared into emptiness. When everyone had gathered, Bellatrix slowly walked to the center of the circle of chairs. 23 pairs of eyes looked at her with a mixture of fear, anger, and determination. "Welcome," she began, her voice echoing in the classroom silence. "Finally we're all together. Your entire Little Protection Alliance." "How touching." Cassius stood from his chair, his wand already in his hand. "Bella, whatever you're planning, this ends now." "Ends?" Bellatrix laughed. "Oh no, Cassius. This is only the beginning." Elizabeth Lovegood also stood, holding her wand. "We know what you did to Larissa. Remove the curse." "What curse?" Bellatrix tilted her head with feigned innocence. Larissa simply understood the truth. "Lies!" exclaimed Adrian Faulkner, also drawing his wand. "You used the Imperious Curse." Other students began standing, wands appearing in hands. Cassius took a step forward. "Surrender, Bella. There are 23 of us, and only one of you." Bellatrix smiled coldly and predatorily. "Only one," she drew her wand. "Perhaps. But I alone am worth 10 of you." The first spell flew from Cassius. "Stupefy." Bellatrix easily dodged. The spell flew past her and hit a chair, which exploded into pieces. "Expelliarmus," shouted Elizabeth. "Protego." Bellatrix raised a shield, then immediately counterattacked. "Confundus." The spell flew towards Elizabeth, but Adrian intercepted it with his own shield. "All together," yelled Cassius. Simultaneously, from different sides flew 5 spells. Bellatrix made a complex movement with her wand. "Protego Maxima." A silvery dome appeared around her, the spells bounced off it. But instead of dissipating, she directed them to different parts of the classroom. "Deflecto," she whispered, and the Stupefy spell that had come from Marcus Primrose bounced off her shield straight into Flora Caro, who fell stunned. "Flora!" someone from the Slytherin screamed. Bellatrix took advantage of the moment of confusion. "Expulso." She directed the spell not at the students, but at the chandelier above their heads. The massive chandelier began to fall. Students scattered in all directions, their formation breaking apart. Petrificus totalis. Bellatrix hit 2 students who hadn't managed to dodge the debris. Cassius understood her tactics. Don't let her separate us. Stay together. But Bellatrix was already moving between chairs and tables, using them as cover. Her wand moved with incredible speed. Impedimenta. The spell flew not directly at its target, but bounced off a metal lamp and hit Thomas Finnegan in the back. She's using ricochets, shouted Elizabeth. Avoid metal objects. But Bellatrix had already found a new tactic. She grabbed one of the chairs with levitation. Mobiliarbus. The chair flew at the group of students. When they destroyed it with spells, debris scattered everywhere, forcing them to disperse. She's playing the field. Adrian realized. We need to corner her. The group began surrounding Bellatrix, but she instantly adapted. Seeing herself being pressed against the wall, she directed her wand at a large portrait. Defendo. The canvas tore, revealing a hidden alcove behind it. Bellatrix leaped inside, gaining a new position. From the alcove she had better overview and cover. Her spells now flew from above, at awkward angles. Confundus. Impedimenta. Stupefy. 3 spells simultaneously, at different points of the group. Students began getting confused, trying to dodge and counterattack at the same time. Marcus Primrose attempted a flanking maneuver, but Bellatrix noticed him. Levi Corpus. The spell lifted the boy into the air by his ankle. While he hung upside down, Bellatrix used him as a human shield. Shoot, she called mockingly. But be careful, you might hit your friend. Cassius and Elizabeth tried to coordinate an attack, but Bellatrix constantly changed position, used the environment, and forced them to risk hitting each other. She's too good, Adrian said, breathing heavily. This can't continue. Indeed, despite all her skill, Bellatrix was beginning to tire. Fighting 20 opponents simultaneously was exhausting even for her. Expelliarmus. 5 students shouted simultaneously. Bellatrix raised a shield, but the force of the impact threw her back. She rolled and quickly stood, but now the group of students surrounded her from all sides. Surrender, Bella, said Cassius, breathing heavily. You've lost. Bellatrix looked around. Indeed, the situation was critical. Around her stood 15 students with wands ready. The rest were neutralized or injured, but that was still too many. She smiled. Lost? She asked. Who said I was playing fair? At that moment the classroom doors burst open with a crash, and 5 7th-year Slytherins rushed in. Rodolphus Lestrange, Edmund Avery, Orion Knott, Mulciber, and Rosier, all with wands ready. Sorry we're late, said Rodolphus with a cold smile. Hope we didn't miss anything? The faces of the Protection Alliance students went white with horror. Now they found themselves caught between 2 fires. How lovely, said Bellatrix, straightening up. Now we can talk like civilized people. Cassius gripped his wand tighter, but understood the hopelessness of the situation. 6 experienced Slytherins against 15 tired and demoralized students. This was no longer a fair fight. What do you want? He asked quietly. Bellatrix smiled triumphantly. To talk. About your future. Rodolphus approached Bellatrix. How are things? He asked quietly. Under control, she replied, surveying the captives. Though some proved more stubborn than expected. Orion Knott picked up one of the wands that had fallen during the battle. What do we do with them? Bellatrix smiled coldly and looked at the group of frightened students who now sat on the floor in the classroom's center, surrounded by Slytherins. We'll talk, she said, about their future. She began walking around the captives, now holding her wand ready. You know what your main mistake is? You think all people are equal, that everyone deserves compassion and understanding. But that's not true. Bellatrix stopped beside Emily Clark, who was trembling with fear. Some people are born to rule, others to serve. Your misfortune is that you don't understand the difference. Cassius, who had a split lip from the battle, tried to stand. Bella, you would have lost if not for reinforcements. You know that. Would have lost. Bellatrix laughed. Cassius, dear, that's exactly the difference between us. You played fair. I played to win. She turned to the entire group. Lesson 1. Strength isn't in nobility. Strength is in intelligence, planning, and readiness to do what's necessary. Bellatrix raised her wand to Emily's temple. Legilimens. The child couldn't resist. Bellatrix ruthlessly penetrated her mind, extracting the most painful memories and fears. Emily began crying but couldn't move. Interesting, Bellatrix murmured. Your little friend still dreams of reuniting the magical and muggle worlds. Even after all our conversations, she withdrew from the girl's mind and looked at the others. It seems more persuasive arguments are needed. Bellatrix turned to Larissa, who still sat in a trance. Larissa, stand. The girl rose, her movements mechanical. Punish yourself for betrayal. Larissa raised her hand and struck herself hard across the face. Then again, and again. Stop, yelled Cassius. She's not in control of herself. That's exactly the point, Bellatrix replied calmly. Control. Some are born to control, others to be controlled. She stopped Larissa with a gesture. And now, said Bellatrix, addressing the entire group, let's discuss your future. She sat in a chair in the circle's center, holding her wand in her lap. You have two choices. The first, join me. Understand the truth about the nature of magic and wizards. Become part of something greater. Something greater? Asked Adrian Faulkner with a trembling voice. A movement that will change the magical world, Bellatrix replied. A movement that will return us to our rightful place above muggles and the weak. And the second choice? Asked Cassius. Bellatrix smiled, and this expression made several students shudder. There is no second choice. She stood and began walking around the circle again. You know too much. You've seen too much. Now you're either with me or... She stopped beside Marcus Primrose and pointed her wand at him. Avada Dash. No, exclaimed Elizabeth Lovegood. We agree. We'll join. Bellatrix paused, her wand still pointed at Marcus. Really? All of you? Students looked at each other. Fear in their eyes battled with disgust, but fear was winning. Yes, whispered Elizabeth. All of us. Even you, Cassius? Asked Bellatrix, not turning to him. A long pause. Then quietly, yes. Bellatrix lowered her wand and turned to the group with a triumphant smile. Wonderful. Then let's seal your new loyalty properly. She raised her wand to the ceiling. Tenebris Sigillum. A dark symbol appeared above the classroom. A stylized serpent entwining a magic wand, surrounded by green sparks. Students looked at it with horror. This is the symbol of our brotherhood, said Bellatrix solemnly. The symbol of those who understand the true nature of power. She lowered her wand and looked at each student. Now you belong to me. Each of you will become my eyes and ears in your house. You'll report to me about everyone who demonstrates wrong tendencies. Everyone who doubts the natural superiority of wizards over muggles. What if we refuse? Quietly asked one of the younger students. Bellatrix looked at him with pity. Thomas Finnegan, 4th year, Hufflepuff. Your mother was born to a family of Irish muggle farmers. They're still alive, aren't they? The boy paled. What do you mean? Simply a fact, Bellatrix replied. An interesting fact about how vulnerable muggles can be. The message was clear. Thomas nodded, trembling. Excellent. Bellatrix rubbed her hands together. Now that we understand each other, let's discuss details. For the next 2 hours, Bellatrix detailed instructions to her new network of agents. Each received specific tasks, targets for observation, methods of passing information. She created a system that covered all of Hogwarts. Cassius received a special task, to watch professors and report their suspicions. Elizabeth was to manage the Ravenclaws. Flora, still weak after being hit by the deflected spell, was responsible for the Slytherins. When everything was organized, Bellatrix allowed the students to disperse. But first, each had to give an unbreakable vow of loyalty, a vow whose violation would mean death. One by one they spoke the words that forever bound them to Bellatrix Black. With each vow she felt her power growing, her control spreading. Cassius was the last to remain. He stood before her, burning with internal struggle. I know what you're thinking, said Bellatrix softly. That this is wrong. That I've gone too far. Yes, he replied simply. But you're still here. Why? Cassius looked into her eyes. Because the alternative is worse. Clever boy, Bellatrix smiled. Now speak the vow. Cassius closed his eyes and began speaking the words that made him forever part of her dark world. When the classroom emptied, Bellatrix remained alone with her fellow Slytherins. She stood among empty chairs and battle debris, savoring the feeling of absolute victory. 23 agents in all houses. Complete control over information. Fear as an instrument of power. Unbreakable vows as guarantee of loyalty. This wasn't simply triumph. This was the birth of a new power at Hogwarts. Bellatrix approached the window and looked down at the castle. Somewhere there slept hundreds of students, not suspecting that their world had changed forever. that among them now were those who served a new order. She took out her diary and made her final entry. Operation completed successfully. Protection Alliance destroyed and converted into Agent Network. Cassius Rosier neutralized and recruited. Larissa Flint under complete control. Hogwarts now belongs to me. Next stage, spreading influence beyond the school. Contacts with like-minded individuals in the magical world. Search for one who can unite us all under one banner. Dark times are approaching, and I will be ready to meet them. She closed the diary and hid it. Outside, snow was falling, covering the world with a white blanket of purity. But Bellatrix knew that beneath this purity lurked something dark and powerful, something she was now part of. As she walked through Hogwarts corridors back to her dormitory, her steps echoed confidently and decisively. These were the steps of one who had found her purpose. These were the steps of a future Death Eater. In the Slytherin common room, Rodolphius waited for her. He sat by the fireplace reading a book, but set it aside when she entered. "How did it go?" he asked. Bellatrix smiled, slowly, contentedly. "Perfectly," she replied. Everything went perfectly. She sat beside him, gazing into the fireplace flames. The fire danced and played, reminding her of the power she had discovered within herself. "What's next?" asked Rodolphius. Bellatrix turned to him, and in her eyes burned the fire of ambition. "Next we change the world," she said simply. "One step at a time." And as they sat by the fireplace that snowy night, both knew this wasn't the end of the story. This was only the beginning.